In the early years of the Cold War, fear was everywhere. The United States government believed its enemies were developing something terrifying, a weapon that didn't rely on bombs or bullets, a weapon that targeted the human mind. Intelligence reports coming from Asia and Eastern Europe told disturbing stories. Captured soldiers returning home claimed they had been changed. Some have confessed to crimes they never committed. Others had revealed sensitive information with almost no resistance. American officials feared the unthinkable. What if the enemy had discovered a way to control human behavior? What if a person could be forced to betray their country against their own will? Inside the CIA, a small group of scientists and intelligence officers began working on an answer. Not to stop mind control, but to master it first. In the early 1950s, the agency launched a classified program designed to explore the limits of human manipulation. Drugs, hypnosis, psychological pressure. The goal was simple: break the mind, rebuild it, and turn it into a weapon. Years later, the world would hear about a program called MKUltra. But few people know the truth. MKUltra was not the beginning. It was the evolution of something far darker, a program hidden deep inside CIA archives, a program known as Project Artichoke. And its experiments raised a disturbing question. Could a human being be turned into an unwilling agent without even knowing it? To understand why Project Artichoke existed, you have to understand the paranoia of the early Cold War. The year was 1950. The world had barely recovered from the devastation of World War II, but a new conflict was already beginning: the Cold War. Two superpowers now faced each other across a divided world. On one side, the United States; on the other, the Soviet Union. And the battle between them wasn't just about territory or military power. It was about influence, ideology, control. Both sides feared that the other was developing secret technologies that could shift the balance of power. Some of the most disturbing rumors involved psychological warfare. American intelligence officers became increasingly concerned about reports coming out of communist countries. Stories about prisoners who had been subjected to strange interrogation techniques, methods that seemed to break a person's resistance with frightening speed. Captured soldiers sometimes returned home with deeply unsettling stories. They claimed they had been pressured, manipulated, and psychologically reshaped. Some even appeared to support the enemy's ideology. To many American officials, this looked like something new, something dangerous. The phrase brainwashing began appearing in intelligence reports. The idea that the human mind itself could be manipulated like a machine. If the Soviet Union or China had developed such techniques, the implications were terrifying. An enemy agent could be turned into a traitor. A soldier could be forced to reveal secrets. A spy could be manipulated into carrying out missions against their own country. Even worse, someone might be programmed to act without realizing it. Inside the CIA, these fears triggered a wave of secret research. Officials began asking unsettling questions. Could drugs weaken someone's mental defenses? Could hypnosis force a person to obey commands? Could psychological pressure break the human mind completely? In 1950, the CIA launched its first attempt to explore these questions. Classified project known as Project Bluebird. Its purpose was to study interrogation methods and psychological manipulation. But as the research continued, the agency began to realize something troubling. The possibilities were far greater than anyone had imagined. By 1951, the CIA decided to expand the project, and when they did, it received a new name: a name that would soon become associated with some of the most disturbing experiments of the Cold War: Project Artichoke. Project Artichoke officially began in 1951. Its mission was both simple and terrifying. The CIA wanted to discover whether it was possible to control human behavior. Not influence it, control it. The program was placed under the supervision of the agency's Office of Scientific Intelligence. A small group of scientists, doctors, and intelligence officers were tasked with pushing the boundaries of psychological experimentation. They explored multiple techniques: drugs that could alter perception, hypnosis that could weaken a person's resistance, extreme interrogation methods designed to break down mental defenses. The central question driving the program was written clearly in one internal CIA memo. Can we get control of an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will? In other words, could someone be turned into a human puppet? Researchers began experimenting with combinations of drugs and psychological techniques. Certain chemicals appeared to weaken a person's sense of reality. Others created confusion, fear, or extreme suggestibility. Some of the most controversial experiments involved early research into psychedelic substances. These drugs seemed capable of dramatically altering perception and cognition. Under the right conditions, they could leave subjects disoriented and vulnerable to suggestion. But drugs alone were not enough. Scientists also experimented with hypnosis. In theory, hypnosis could bypass a person's conscious resistance. Commands might be implanted deep within the mind, commands that could later be triggered. The CIA was fascinated by a disturbing possibility. Could a hypnotized subject be ordered to perform an action and then forget the command entirely? Some researchers believed it might be possible. If true, the implications were staggering. An individual could unknowingly carry out a mission and afterward have no memory of doing it. But there was a problem. These experiments required human subjects, and not all of them were willing participants. The experiments conducted under Project Artichoke remain controversial to this day. Many of the program's files were later destroyed, but the surviving documents paint a disturbing picture. Some experiments were conducted in secret facilities. Others took place in overseas locations where legal restrictions were weaker. The CIA sometimes used prisoners as test subjects, people who had little ability to refuse. In other cases, foreign detainees were subjected to interrogation techniques designed to push the limits of human endurance. The goal was to discover how far the mind could be stretched before it broke. Subjects were sometimes exposed to combinations of drugs and hypnosis. Researchers observed their reactions carefully. How quickly did confusion set in? How easily could suggestions be implanted? Could memories be altered? Could resistance be erased? One particularly disturbing line of research explored the idea of creating amnesia. If an individual carried out a mission under psychological control, it would be essential that they remember nothing afterward. Some scientists believed drugs might make this possible. Others thought hypnosis could bury memories deep within the subconscious. CIA reports from the time suggested that researchers were deeply interested in creating what they called controlled agent, individuals who could perform actions without fully understanding why, and perhaps even without remembering afterward. But the experiments were unpredictable. Human psychology proved far more complex than expected. Drugs sometimes caused panic or paranoia. Hypnosis did not always produce reliable results. Still, the agency remained convinced that the research was worth pursuing. Because if the United States didn't master these techniques, someone else might. And that possibility terrified Cold War strategists. By the early 1950s, Project Artichoke had grown significantly, but the CIA wanted something bigger, more funding, more research, more aggressive experimentation. And that ambition would soon lead to the creation of one of the most infamous programs in intelligence history, MKUltra. By 1953, CIA officials believed that Project Artichoke had only scratched the surface. The research had revealed something unsettling. The human mind was far more vulnerable than anyone had imagined. Under the right conditions, perception could be altered, memories could be distorted, and psychological pressure could break even the strongest resistance. But Artichoke had limitations. Its experiments were scattered and relatively small in scale. If the agency truly wanted to explore mind control, it needed a much larger program. That program would be launched later that same year. It would be called MKUltra. Unlike Artichoke, MKUltra operated on a massive scale. Dozens of universities, hospitals, and research institutions became involved. Hundreds of experiments were conducted, many of them using drugs like LSD. Some subjects volunteered. Others had no idea they were being tested. MKUltra eventually became one of the most controversial intelligence programs ever revealed. But its origins can be traced directly back to Project Artichoke. The techniques explored under Artichoke laid the foundation. The idea that drugs and psychological manipulation could influence human behavior. The possibility that a person might be turned into an unwilling participant in covert operations. Even today, historians continue to debate how far these experiments actually went. Did the CIA succeed in controlling the human mind? Or did the program ultimately fail? The surviving documents offer hints, but many files were destroyed decades ago, which means the full story may never be known. Project Artichoke remains classified for years. Most Americans had no idea it even existed. When fragments of the program were finally revealed in the 1970s, they shocked the public. But by then, much of the evidence had already disappeared. Documents destroyed, experiments buried in secrecy, and questions left unanswered. What exactly did the CIA discover during those early experiments? Did any of the techniques actually work? And if Project Artichoke was only the beginning, what else might have been created afterward? Because once the CIA launched MKUltra, the experiments didn't stop. They only became more ambitious, more secretive, and far more controversial. And that raises a disturbing possibility. If the early Cold War experiments were capable of manipulating the human mind, how far did the research really go? And could some of those techniques still exist today? That question leads directly to the next chapter in this story, the program the world would eventually come to know as MKUltra.